Welcome to Outlaw Theology with the Whiskey Preacher. I'm your host, Phil Shepard, better known as the Whiskey Preacher. On this episode of Outlaw Theology, we have a very special guest, Dr. Derek Penwell, the senior minister of Douglas Boulevard Christian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Penwell is also the Open and Affirming Chair of GLAD, an advocacy group of the LGBTQ community for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Dr. Penwell is here to talk with us today about GLAD's resolution that they are proposing at the General Assembly in 2013 for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And the resolution states to make us as a general church an open and affirming denomination to everyone. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Derek Penwell. Welcome, Derek. Thank you so much for joining Outlaw Theology with the Whiskey Preacher.
Well, glad to be here.
How was your holiday?
It was fantastic. It's fantastic. Got little ones, and so it's always fun around our house.
That means it's all about the kids and nothing about the adults.
Mostly, yeah. But that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah. So let's dive into this conversation. I have you on here today to talk about something that's the shift that's happening within the denomination that we're both ministers in, which is the Disciples of Christ Christian Church.
Mm-hmm.
And you are helping spearhead this referendum within the General Assembly that's coming up, giving the LGBTQ community equal rights within standing. Is that correct? Or did I put that correctly?
Actually, what we're looking to do is to start much more basic.
Okay.
And that is to allow the denomination to be able to say with a straight face that we welcome all people, that we extend hospitality to all people, regardless of their race or gender or sexual orientation or gender identity and so forth. And believing that's at least a true expression of who we are. Or if it's not now, that it is aspirational, that it ought to be. I mean, that ought to be who we hold out in front of ourselves as who we want to be, and then we'll live into it, right? Whether that means extending that to ordination rights, same-gender marriage, so forth and so on. This particular initiative, the resolution that we've submitted, doesn't address those things specifically. Only that the denomination sees itself as pursuing justice for all people, and that means accepting into the life, full participation in life and service of the church, everyone, regardless of those kinds of things that have been to this point a kind of bar to entry.
Now, for those of you that don't know and are watching this for the first time and don't know much about the Christian Church, we function, maybe the only mainline denomination that functions with autonomous communities. With that said, why is it the push on the national level for this to be said? One, each community can decipher on their own what that means on their own terms. They're already doing that, are they not?
No, that's a good question. Because we have a sort of congregational polity, what that means is that, as you say, each congregation makes decisions about how it's going to organize itself, the kinds of theology that it will proclaim to the world. And as a consequence, you have a broad range of theological conviction throughout discipledom. But what this does and sort of aiming for the general church on a kind of a not just national, because it's the United States and Canada, but aiming for the general church allows us to hold before us a kind of vision of who we as a denomination believe ourselves ultimately to be, where we're headed. And though not all of the communities, all of the congregations are there, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. In fact, I would argue that it means we ought to be even more intentional about it if that's where we think we ought to go. What it really does is to say, you may not be here now, but as a denomination, this is where we think we need to go, based on a variety of things, not only our reading of Scripture, but also our reading of the culture, right? Because culture is shifting pretty amazingly quickly, and for the general church to say this allows for those of us who work with LGBT folks to be able to say to people who are looking for church, not only LGBT folks, but also their allies, people for whom this is a real issue of moral conscience, that we as a denomination, not everybody participates, we as a denomination believe that this is true and just and a legitimate reading of the gospel.
Some of the concerns that I've heard in pushing how should I want to say this, in presenting this document to the general church, that some of more the, well, I'll just say it, like the Hispanic and Haitian churches that tend to be more theologically conservative, some of the concern is that if this is put through in the general church, that they will feel like that's an impingement upon their rights and they're threatening to leave. What do you say to something like that?
I think that that's unfortunate. I mean, on a basic level, part of the reason I'm Disciples is because I want as many people at the table as possible.
Yeah,
that's sort of what's encoded in our DNA, and the thought that somebody might leave the table as a result of, well, whatever, is troubling. However, I mean, having said that, we don't want to back ourselves into the corner of saying that issues of justice can be thwarted because particular constituencies say, we will, if you do this, we will no longer consider ourselves in fellowship with you. That's a reality, but it's one that ultimately I think you're going to find on a wide range of issues. Somebody's going to be mad about something all the time. And as distressing as that is, what that means, I think, ultimately, is that we have to say, if that's the case, then we're going to have to follow our truest understanding of what justice calls from us. And we'll let God take care of what happens. Now, that doesn't mean we're mean and insensitive or anything like that, but that we have to be faithful to the call of the gospel that we've discerned God is calling us to.
You made an interesting point. You said that we're all going to be mad about something.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the issue of LGBT equality is that one thing that's unacceptable to a lot of not only disciple churches, but the greater church in general?
Well, here's how I think it breaks down. If you are supportive of the inclusion of LGBTQ folks in the life and ministry of the church, then chances are you probably think that people who are created by God with particular sexual orientation or identity have been created that way on purpose, right? That God created LGBTQ folks the way they are, and was perfectly satisfied with that. Now, if you happen to be one of those people who believes that the inclusion of LGBTQ folks is a sin, then the way you look at it is that God set down parameters for human behavior and for human sexuality. And to the extent that you cross those parameters because of a choice that you've made, you are sinning. And to these folks, sexual orientation is a choice. Gender identity is a choice. And as such, because it crosses boundaries, is a sinful choice. That's where I think the divide lies. And it really sort of harkens back to arguments over the authority of Scripture and how it is that we read Scripture and all that kind of stuff.
Tell me, what other pushback have you had in presenting this idea of to the general church?
It falls along, I guess, a couple of points. There are a couple of things that have been raised. One is this issue of who are you going to push out if you move ahead with this, right? The question that the thing we just talked about, right? Are you going to cause people who disagree with you to leave communion as a result of this? Another one is, and we sort of touched on this earlier, and that is, in order to say, because of our polity, which is congregational, that we are a welcoming church to LGBTQ folks, you would have to have some sense that the general church had reached a consensus. That is to say, that enough congregations had declared themselves open and affirming to be able to make that a truthful statement. Now, let me circle back to the first one for a second, and then I'll end up answering the second one. The first one, I think, the issue of will it cause division, and that's a serious one. I think that we have to take that very seriously. But I also think that one of the factors that gets left out of this particular...
Sorry, my mail.
No problem. One of the things that gets left out of this discussion is another constituency who doesn't get talked about, right? We're talking about sort of the progressives against the conservatives. That's how it gets framed. But what about all those people who are outside the church, who would like to find themselves at home in the church, but who because they believe the church continues to be anti-homosexual and so on and so forth, will never come to the doors of the church. In short, how long will we continue to argue who's going to leave before we take up the issue of who are we already forcing never to out the door, never putting up a barrier to ever entering into the conversation in the first place? Does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
And the second one is, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, the question about how can we say we welcome LGBTQ folks if we don't a huge identifiable consensus among congregations? Well, we have a history as a denomination over the last 40 plus years of sometimes having to stand out in front of an issue before there's a consensus. Or on the issue of women's ordination, the general church made they passed resolutions saying that these were things that we valued, and then we lived into them over the course of time. But they didn't wait until all of the churches polled we're able to say, yeah, we're on board with this, before standing up and saying, no, justice demands that we stand up now and speak what we think God is calling us to say.
So changing gears a little bit, we've talked about what the pushback is, some of the negativity surrounding this issue. I want to hear the hopes and dreams, the good stuff behind this. What do you all hope and dream that will be accomplished? Obviously, it's the idea that the general church will say that, yeah, we're open to all different types of folks, not just limited to the LGBTQ community, but people of handicap, people of different skin color, people fat, people who are muscle bound, He-Man, people of all different places in life that we are open to. I agree with you. I think that this is the future of the church. That's what we celebrate here at the Eucatastrophe here in Fort Worth, and I know that's what you do at Douglas Boulevard, and that we want to help push the whole general church to not be like us. We don't want to create carbon copies, but have a stance of being welcoming, because for far too long, I think we have not been. And I think it does this conversation injustice just to say this is about LGBTQ community, even though that's a big part of it. But I don't think it does it justice to say that this is only talking about this portion of the community, that we need to be open and to all different types of people, all different expressions of people. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. In my position as the open and affirming team leader for GLAD, for the disciples.
And for those people who don't know what GLAD is, what does that stand for?
That stands for Gay, Lesbian, and Affirming Disciples. It's sort of it's sort of the advocacy group within disciples for the rights and so forth of gay and lesbian folks, and it oversees, that is to say, GLAD oversees a listing of churches that have publicly declared themselves to be open and affirming, meaning that there are churches who say publicly, we accept all people regardless of gender identity, or sexual orientation or race, or the whole list of enumerated classes of people, and it curates this list as a way of offering information to people who are seeking those kinds of congregations. Right. So if I'm looking for one, I can go to the GLAD list and say, well, here's a list of 100 plus congregations in the United States, disciples congregations who are open and affirming. All right. So I'm principally responsible for helping walk people through that process right now. And as a consequence, I talk to churches about what are the pitfalls, what are some of the concerns that communities have. And one of the ones that gets named most and loudest is, well, we don't want to be known as the gay church. I understand that. I mean, I really do. But what has happened in our experience here at Douglas, and I suspect it has been the experience of a number, I know it has with many of my friends, is that becoming open and affirming is not code for gay friendly. It is an access to issues of justice that expand beyond LGBTQ issues. it begins to open your eyes to the way that the system that's in place in our country, economically, sociologically, and so forth, is sort of engineered to keep powerful people in powerful positions and sort of marginalize folks in on the fringes. And when you begin to have conversations with some of these people who've been sort of run out of churches because of their sexual orientation or whatever, we get way more sensitive to the ways that we do that with immigrants, right? Or people of color, or people who have disabilities, or people who have addiction problems, and a whole new sort of vista of possibilities for the church to live out witness as the embodiment of Christ's justice in this new reign of God that's unfolding. It just completely opens new areas of service up. It's pretty fascinating how it tends to work out. So yeah, you hit exactly on the right on the right.
I find it interesting that you said that, because having these conversations with friends of mine who are gay ministers, we have an open lesbian on staff here at the Uke. She's our community pastor and one of our teaching pastors, and a few other friends of mine that are within the Disciples denomination and other denominations that are openly gay ministers, especially those that are in the emergent missional conversation. That's been their one critique about the open and affirming conversation, and labeling your church as an open and affirming conversation is that even for them it seems like a code word for we're the gay church for them, and that's from their point of view, them being part of the LGBTQ community, saying that we don't want to be the gay church. We want to fervently be open and affirming to everybody. And I'm glad you said that, because I think that's a huge misnomer about saying that you're a part of the open and affirming greater community, that it's only limited to the LGBTQ, because it's not code word for we are the gay church. Because a majority of my gay friends that want to go to church just want to go to church. They don't want to go, even though I think the Metropolitan Church has done a phenomenal service for the LGBTQ community. But friends of mine, at least here in Texas, that it's even a little more conservative than where a lot of places are. You know this because you minister in Kentucky, very similar, that going to a quote-unquote gay church is even a little bit uncomfortable for some of the folks that are Christians or follow a faith, be followers of God through the way of Jesus. So they want to go to a church just with their friends and family. They don't want to be the stereotype. They just want to go to church, have a faith community, and be accepted and loved no matter what their sexual orientation is, no matter what color they are, no matter if they have a handicap or not. They just want to be a part of a faith community. And I'm really excited that you said that, because I think people need to hear that it's not, this is a bigger conversation than the LGBTQ community.
No, that's right. This is about justice and living out our call to proclaim release to the captives and so on. We are in the business of trying to live like Jesus. This particular issue happens to be really important in the cultural conversation right now. It's not the only issue. But what it certainly does, it seems to me, at least it does in my life and in the life of our congregation, is that it opens us up to the ways that so many other people have been kept down by a system that is intent on maintaining power, and this is something that gives us more opportunities, not fewer.
I like that a lot. I really do. So, as we wrap this conversation up, what are some parting thoughts you want to leave with folks who are new to this conversation? What can they, if you have 2 or 3 just small bullet points of you want to leave with people in this conversation?
One would be what we were just talking about, that that accepting responsibility for advocating for LGBTQ folks, rather than limiting the horizon of service to just this narrow field, expands it, right? Secondly, I suppose I would say that all of the statistical analysis suggests that our culture is headed toward full acceptance. I mean, the trends appear to be inevitable. This is where we're headed. The church, within a period of years, and by let me say it this way: mainline churches within a few years are going to see this as a kind of non-issue. Partly because young people see this as a non-issue, and if you also see it as a non-issue, my job is to help to try to persuade you to begin to raise your voice in order to advocate for full acceptance. Because, this is third, that was put out a few years ago by David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyon, Unchristian, right? What a new generation really thinks about Christianity. Well, one of the bullet points that they had, one of the chapters they had, was on homosexuality. They asked a series of questions about what do you see, when you think of the church, what are the things that you think of, what are the first that come to mind? 91% of the young people ages 18 to 29, 35, the first thing that came to their mind, 91% anti-homosexual. Of those young people who were in the church, 80% said anti-homosexual. So we, the church, mainline churches in particular, have really got to figure out how it is not only that we can pursue justice, but that we can communicate that our pursuit of justice identifies who we are.
I know that, again, referring to a lot of my friends that are gay and ministers or in the church, they are frothing at the mouth for the day that this is no longer an issue in the church, and so we can go on and do bigger, not better or bigger things, but different things that exfoliate the kingdom of God at hand, that pushes on the social justice, that we as a church as a whole can just move on. Because you're right, for majority, let me go back just for a second. One of the biggest complaints of dying churches is that we need more young people. Well,
yes.
One of the problems is that, yeah, you're right, we need more young people, but you don't give a damn about what they have to say. So you're not going to get them if you don't listen to them. And one of the biggest things that they're talking about is, this is not an issue. Can we go on? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Let me tell you a really short story about what happened, and I think it perfectly epitomizes what the church is confronting. I've written about this. We had a couple in our church, Charlie and Kirby, been together for 38 years. Well, Charlie died this fall, and he was he was an elder in the church, and he was one of the favorites of our kids, my two teenagers in particular. When Charlie died, I had to go home and tell my kids, and I didn't know how I was going to do it because it was really an emotional thing. I had to tell them that Charlie died. And you know the first thing they asked me when I told them, both of them in separate occasions said, "How's Kirby?" I think that the church is going to have to come to terms with a culture in which the first thing out of a young person's mouth when they hear about a situation like this is, "How's Kirby?" Because, see, they understand that to be a normal and natural kind of thing. They don't think of it any differently from whether that was Charlie and Kathy, right? That to them is just normal. And the church is going to have to figure out how it's going to live out its witness in a world in which young people think just that.
Dr. Derek Penwell, thank you very much for joining us here on Outlaw Theology, and I look forward to having you here again as a guest. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, my brother.
Talk to you soon.
All right.